An AutoML platform is basically a platform where you don't have to write a code to run machine learning models. Apart from that, I also work as a machine learning instructor at Udemy and Upgrad. All right. So starting off this session, in this session, we will unpack the what, why, and how of data science. By the end of this session, you will have a better grasp of how data is being used around you and how you can use data. So if we Google what is data science, we will see a huge amount of confusing information. But data science is actually very simple. It's a set of methodologies for taking in thousands of forms of data that are available to us today and using them to draw meaningful conclusions. Data is being collected all around us. Every like, click, email, credit card swipe, or tweet is a new piece of data that can be used to describe the present or better predict the future. So, what can data do? Data can describe the current state, like our energy consumption. This can be accomplished with dashboards or alerts, simplifying time intensive reporting processes. It can help detect anomalous events such as fraudulent purchases. If we have data on what has happened previously, we can increase efficiency by automatically detecting a new event that is unexpected or abnormal. Data can also diagnose the causes of observed events and behaviors. For instance, your activity on Spotify or Netflix. Rather than determining correlations between small number of events, data science techniques help us understand complex systems with many possible causes. Finally, data can predict future events such as forecasting population size. We can use new techniques to take various causes into account and predict potential outcomes. Further, we can evaluate the probability of a prediction mathematically to clarify our level of uncertainty. So now we know what data science is. The next question is, why is it so popular? The answer is pretty obvious. We are collecting more data than ever before. Suppose that you visit a car dealership and fill out some information. All of that data is automatically entered into a computer and combined with the data from hundreds of dealerships into one big database. Once we have that data, it's easy to use the email address that you provided when you bought that car to tie your car purchase data with your data from social media or web browsing. Suddenly, we have a very complete picture about everyone who purchased the car in the last year, their ages, their likes and dislikes, their friends and family. This additional data can be used to predict what price you can pay for your car, what other purchases you are likely to make, or how best to sell your insurance for that new car. Data is everywhere and it is incredibly valuable information for businesses, organizations, and governments. So the question is, how do we start to use that data? In data science, we generally have four steps to any project. First, we collect data from many sources such as surveys, web traffic results, geotagged social media posts, and financial transactions. Once collected, we store that data in a safe and accessible way. At this point, data is in its raw form. So the next step is to prepare data. This includes cleaning data, for instance, finding missing or duplicate values, and converting data into a more organized format. Then we explore and visualize the clean data. This could involve building dashboards to track how the data changes over time or performing comparisons between two sets of data. Finally, we run experiments and predictions on the data. For example, this could involve building a system that forecasts temperature changes or performing a test to find which web page acquires more customers. Now you know why data science is important. And the first 4 steps in the data science workflow. Let's move on to another chapter in today's webinar. Before that, do you guys have any doubts? Any doubts, guys? You can post it in the chat. I will wait for 10-15 seconds if you guys have any doubts. Or we can proceed ahead to our next lesson. No doubts, guys? Fine, we'll move ahead then. So previously, you learned the definition of data science and the steps in data science workflow. In this lesson, you will learn how data science can be applied to real world problems. 1 second, the screen is not moving. Just a second. Fine. So now let's take a deep dive into 3 exciting areas of data science. That is traditional machine learning. The second is the Internet of Things. And the third is deep learning. Suppose you work in fraud detection at a large bank. You would like to use data to determine the probability that the transaction is fake. To answer this question, you might start by gathering information about each purchase, such as the amount, date, location, purchase type, and cardholder's address. You would need many examples of transactions, including the information, as well as a label that tells you whether each transaction is valid or fraudulent. Luckily, you probably have this information in a database. These records are called training data and are used to build an algorithm. Each time a new transaction occurs, you will give your algorithm information like amount and date. And it will answer the original question, that is, what is the probability that this transaction is fraudulent? Before we answer that question, let's walk through our example and highlight what we need for machine learning to work its magic. First, a data science problem begins with a well-defined question. Our question was, what is the probability that this transaction is fraudulent? Next, we need some data to analyze. We have months of old credit card transactions and associated metadata like date and location that have already been identified as either fraudulent or valid. Finally, we need additional data every time we want to make a new prediction. We need to have the same type of information on every purchase so that we could label it as fraudulent or valid. Now, suppose you are trying to build a smartwatch to monitor physical activity. You want to be able to auto detect different activities such as walking and running. Your smartwatch is equipped with a special sensor called an accelerometer that monitors generated by this sensor is the basis of your machine learning problem. You could ask several volunteers to wear your watch and record when they are running or walking. You could then develop an algorithm that recognizes accelerometer data as representing one of those two states, that is either walking or running. Your smartwatch is part of a fast growing field called the Internet of Things, also known as IoT, which is often combined with data science. IoT refers to gadgets that are not standard computers, but still have the ability to transmit data. This includes smartwatches, internet connected home security device systems, electronic toll collection systems, and much more. IoT data is a great resource for data science projects. Let's tackle another example. A key task for self-driving cars is identifying when an image contains a human. What would be the data set for this problem? We could express the picture as a matrix of numbers where each number represents a pixel. However, this approach would probably fail if we fed the matrix into a traditional machine learning model. There's simply too much input data. We need more advanced algorithms from a subfield of machine learning called deep learning. In deep learning, multiple layers of mini algorithms called neurons work together to draw complex conclusions. Deep learning takes much more training data than a traditional machine learning model, but is also able to learn relationships that traditional models cannot. Deep learning is used to solve data intensive problems such as image classification or language understanding. So we are now familiar with several different applications of data science. Let's move on to a different lecture. We will talk about roles. Before that, any doubt up till now? Anything you want to ask? You can post it in the chat. I will wait for 10-15 seconds. Any doubts, guys? Or should I proceed? I see no chat. Fine. We'll then proceed. So in this lesson, you will learn about the different data roles and the tools they use. You might be surprised to learn that there isn't a single job within data science. Generally, there's four jobs: data engineer, data analyst, data scientist, and machine learning scientist. Let's explore each one. Data engineers control the flow of data. That is, they build custom data pipelines and storage systems. They design infrastructure so that data is not only collected but easy to obtain and process. Within the data science workflow, they focus on the first stage, that is data collection and storage. Data engineers are proficient in SQL, which they use to store and organize data. They also use one of the following programming languages like Java, Scala, or Python to process data. They use shell on the command line to automate and run tasks. Finally, data engineers now more than ever need to be comfortable with cloud computing to ingest and store large amounts of data. Data analysts describe the present via data. They do this by exploring the data and creating visualizations and dashboards. To do these tasks, they often have to clean data first. Analysts have less programming and statistical experience than the other roles. Within the workflow, they focus on the middle two stages, that is, data preparation and exploration and visualization. Data analysts use SQL, the same language used by data engineers, to query data. While data engineers build and configure SQL, uh, analysts use existing database to their analysis. Data analysts use spreadsheets to perform simple analysis on small quantities of data. Analysts also use business intelligence such as Tableau, Power BI, or Looker to create dashboards and share their analysis. More advanced data analysts may be comfortable with Python or R for cleaning and analyzing data. Data scientists have a strong background in statistics, enabling them to find new insights from data rather than solely describing data. They also use traditional machine learning for predicting and forecasting. Within the workflow, they focus on the last three stages, that is, data preparation, exploration, and visualization. Similar to analysts, data scientists have strong skills in SQL. Data scientists must be proficient in at least Python or R. Within these languages, they use popular data science libraries such as Pandas or Tidyverse. These libraries contain reusable code for common data science tasks. Machine learning scientists are similar to data scientists, but with a machine learning specialization. Machine learning is perhaps the busiest part of data science. It's used to extrapolate what's likely to be true from what we already know. These scientists use training data to classify larger, unrulier data or untidy data, whether it's to classify images that contain a car or to create a chatbot. they go beyond traditional machine learning and go ahead with deep learning. Within the workflow, they do the last three stages with a strong focus on prediction. Machine learning scientists use either Python or R to create their predictive models. Within these languages, they use popular machine learning libraries such as TensorFlow to run powerful deep learning algorithms. Here's a slide to recap what we have covered. It may be intimidating to see all these tools and languages, but they aren't as difficult to learn as spoken languages. If you know English, it may take you years to learn French. Programming languages are more similar to power tools, basically. If you know how to use a power drill, you don't necessarily know how to use an electric saw, but you can learn it with a little training. All right, time for our next chapter. Before that, guys, if you are interested in any of these roles, there is a program available with Virgio. It's called Data Science Certification and Training, and we provide it with 100% placement assistance. So you can go through the course. So we offer it in 3 modules. The first module has 40 hours of content, the second has 60 hours, and the third 100 hours. So you can choose your module respectively, looking at the uh, features it provides. So moving on to our next chapter. Any doubt up till now, guys, regarding any roles or anything? What is a power drill? It is used to drill any structure. It is used to drill the land. Can you go to the data analyst slide? Yeah, sure. This slide, Anil, what do you want to know about it? You can post a question, Anil. Yes, what about this? What do you want to know? What? Please post it in the chat, Anil. Does mathematics play any role in data science? Mathematics is the only thing, is the only major thing that plays a role in data science. You need to be a good statistician to be good at data science. What do you mean by visualization? Visualization, Anil, is basically a process to make graphs or plots. So to make graphs or plots using coding is basically what you call visualization. Processing or programming? What, Anil? I didn't get your question. Okay, RK Sharma is asking which part of it. Okay, so to build a machine learning model, uh, a machine learning model basically has maths running behind it. So to tweak a model, you can obviously use your default parameters and just run it as it is. But in real world jobs, you won't use it that way. You have to tweak your machine learning model, use some different formulas to arrive at it. So that is where statistics comes in, and statistics is the major part in your machine learning job or data science job. Dhimant is saying he has a problem with audio. Can you hear me? Is there any preceded software for them? Software for what, Anil? Your voice is low. Just sorry, guys. I will try to speak loudly, but prescribed for analysis. Yes, there are many softwares like Tableau. So you can go through them. There are many softwares available for them. There is Power BI available as well. So these are the major softwares that are used by analysts to make plots basically. Okay. Any other doubts, guys? Should we move ahead if there are no doubts up till now? I'll wait for another 5-10 seconds. Fine, we'll move ahead then. Okay. So previously, guys, you learned about the data science workflow. In this chapter, we will focus on the first step, that is data collection and storage. Before we start deriving insights from data, we first need to collect the data from different sources. That's what we will talk about in this chapter. We are generating vast amounts of data on a daily basis simply by surfing the internet, tracking a run, or by playing a card in a shop. The companies behind these services that we use collect this data internally. They use this to help them make data driven decisions. On the other hand, there are also many free open data sources available. This means the data can be freely used, shared, and built on by anyone. Note that sometimes companies share parts of their data with a larger audience as well. Let's first take a look at company data sources. Some of the most common sources of data are web events, survey data, customer data, logistic data, and also financial transactions. Let's dive a bit deeper into web data. When you visit a web page or click on a link, usually this information is tracked by companies in order to calculate conversion rates or monitor the popularity of different pieces of content. The following information is captured, that is the name of the event, which could mean the URL of the page visited, or an identifier for the element that was clicked, or the timestamp of the event, and an identifier for the user that performed the action. Data can also be collected by asking people for their opinions in surveys. This can be, for example, in the form of a face to face interview, online questionnaire, or a focus group. You have likely answered a question as shown in the image before. This is a very common type of survey data used by companies, which is the Net Promoter Score or NPS, which asks you how likely a user is to recommend a product to a friend or a colleague. There are multiple ways to access open data. Two of them are APIs and public records. To begin with APIs, API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's an easy way of requesting data from a third party over the internet. Many companies have public APIs to let anyone access their data. Some notable APIs include Twitter, Wikipedia, Yahoo, and Google Maps. But there are many, many more. Let's look at an example of the Twitter API. Suppose we want to track tweets with the hashtag data framed. We can use the Twitter API to request all tweets within this hashtag. At this point, we have many options for analysis. We could perform a sentiment analysis on the text of each tweet and get an idea of how people like our podcast. We could simply track how often hashtag Virgio appears in each week. We could also combine this data with our downloads data and see if positive tweets are correlated with more downloads. Public records are another great way of gathering data. They can be collected and shared by international organizations like the World Bank, the UN, or the WHO, who use census and survey data, or government agencies basically, who make information about, for example, the weather, environment, or population publicly available. For example, in the US, data.gov has health, education, and commerce data available for free download. In the EU or European Union, data.europa.eu has similar data. You now know some common sources of data that can be used when working on a data science project. Let's move on to another chapter, which is data types. Any doubts, guys, up till now? Can data science be done using VS Code? It can be done. You can write Python code in your VS Code, but the plots and everything, uh, it is better if you use Jupyter Notebook or a similar software, so that you can run your script, get the output at the next line. With VS Code, it's not possible that way, but you can do it. I mean, but the generally accepted software by everyone is uh, Jupyter Notebook. Any doubts, guys, up till now? Should we move ahead? I don't see any chat. So we now know we now know where to collect data. But what does that data look like? In this chapter, we will talk about the different types of data. The screen is 1 second. You might wonder why it's important to know what type of data you have collected. This will be essential later on in the data science process. For instance, it's especially relevant when you want to store the data, which we will talk about in the next lesson, as not all types of data can be stored in the same place. Furthermore, when you're visualizing or analyzing the data, it's important to know the type of data you are dealing with. Not all visualizations or analysis can be performed with all data types. So let's dive in. So there are two general types of data, qualitative and quantitative data. It's important to understand the key differences between both. Quantitative data can be counted, measured, and expressed using numbers. Qualitative data is descriptive and conceptual. Qualitative data can be observed but not measured. Now that we know the differences, let's dive into each type of data with a real world example. Qualitative data can be expressed in numbers. For example, the fridge is 60 inches tall, has two apples in it, and costs 30,000 rupees or $1,000, whatever it is. Qualitative data, on the other hand, are things that can be observed but not measured, like the fridge is red, was built in Italy, and might need to be cleaned out because it smells like fish. Other than the traditional qualitative and quantitative data, there are many other data types that are becoming more and more important. There is image data, text data, geospatial data, network data, and many more. Note that these other data types aren't mutually exclusive with qualitative and quantitative data, meaning often these other data types are a special mix of qualitative and quantitative data. Let's look at other examples to understand it more properly. So digital images are everywhere. An image basically is made up of pixels. These pixels contain information about color and intensity. Typically, the pixels are stored in computer memory. In the example, you can see that if we zoom in on the image, we can distinguish the different pixels: emails, documents, reviews, social media posts, and so on. As you can imagine, text data can be found in many places. This data can be stored and analyzed to find relevant insights. On the slide, you can see an example of a restaurant review. Geospatial data are data with location information. In the example, you can see that many different types of information can be captured using geospatial data. For a specific region, we can keep track of where the roads, the buildings, and vegetation are. This is especially useful for navigation apps like Waze and Google Maps. Network data consists of the people or things in a network depicted by circles on the slide and the relationships between them depicted by lines on the slide. Here, you can see an example of a social network. You can easily see who knows whom. In this chapter, we looked at the common data types. qualitative data, quantitative data, image data, text data, geospatial data, and network data. These can all serve as inputs for your data science analysis. But before doing that, the data needs to be stored. That's what we will cover in the next chapter. Any doubts, guys, up till now? You can ask it in the chat. How do you differentiate data in machine learning? You just have to view it, Anil Kumar, as I mentioned. You have to, so in data science, there is a part called exploratory data analysis, where you figure out how your data acts and how it should be used in a machine learning model. So that is covered in exploratory data analysis, what you're talking about. Any other doubt, Anil? Should we move ahead, Anil, if there are no doubts? Is data also collected through camera and microphone? Yes. That's what Google and Facebook at least does. That is what we know. Anything else, RK Sharma, that you want to ask Anil Kumar? There are other participants too. You all can participate. Even if permission is not allowed. No, not when the permission is not allowed, but when it is allowed, it is done. But what they do is there are tricks that they use even if you don't set your permissions. There are still some ways that they can still get data, not fully, but still they get their task done. Anything else, Anil Kumar, RK Sharma? Should we move ahead then? Fine. Okay, good, fine. So previously in this chapter, you learned about different data sources and data types. Now, let's discuss efficient ways of storing and retrieving the data that was collected. As you can see, this is still part of the first step in the data science workflow we defined before. When storing data, there are multiple things to take into consideration. First, we need to determine where we want to store the data. Then, we need to know what kind of data we are storing. And lastly, we need to consider how we can retrieve our data from storage. Let's take a closer look. Data science projects could require large amounts of data. At this point, the data probably can't be stored on a single computer anymore. In order to make sure that all data is saved and easy to access, it is stored across many different computers. Large companies often have their own set of storage computers called a cluster or a server on premises. Alternatively, you could pay another company to store data for you. This is referred to as cloud storage. Common cloud storage providers include Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services or AWS, and Google Cloud. These services provide more than just data storage. They can also help your organization with data analytics, machine learning, and deep learning. For now, we will just focus on data storage. Different types of data require different storage solutions. Some data is unstructured, like email, text, video, and audio files, and so on. This type of data is often stored in a type of database called a document database. More commonly, data can be stored as tables of information, like what you might find in a spreadsheet. A database that stores information in tables is called a relational database. Both of these types of databases can be found on the cloud storage providers that were mentioned earlier. Once data has been stored in a document database or a relational database, we will need to access it. At a very basic level, we will want to be able to request a specific piece of data, such as all of the images that were created on March 3rd or all of the customer addresses in Montana. In addition, We might even want to do some analysis, such as summing, counting, or averaging data. Each type of database has its own query language. Document databases mainly use NoSQL, while relational databases mainly use SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, as you might know, and NoSQL stands for Not Only SQL. Storing your data is like building a library. First, you need to decide where to build your library. That corresponds to choosing a location, either an on-premises cluster or one of the cloud providers we discussed before, Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud. Next, you need to decide what types of shelves to install to store your books. The types of shelves will depend on the types of books. This is analogous to choosing between a document database for unstructured data or a relational database for tabular data. Just like library, uh, just like a library might have multiple types of shelves, you might need to have some data stored in a document database and some other data stored in a relational database. Finally, you will need a system for referencing and checking out books. The way you locate and retrieve each book depends on how that book is stored. Similarly, you need a query language to speak to the database. For document databases, we generally use NoSQL, and for relational databases, we generally use SQL. Now that you understand different ways of storing data, let's move on to a different chapter. Any doubt, guys, up till now, up till this chapter? You can ask it in the chat, guys. Any doubts up till now, or should we move ahead? I'll wait for 5-10 seconds. Yeah, that was just for reference. Any doubts, guys, related to any concepts? Technical term? No, no, no. It's not a technical term. Any doubts, guys? Should we move ahead? I'll wait for 2-3 seconds more. Fine. We'll move ahead, guys. As I can see on my screen, it's recording. Yes, it's recording. Is it being stored somewhere? We don't know what Zoom's uh, structure is, what they do, but my guess is they do. My guess is that they do store some information of our meetings somewhere. No, it can't be retrieved by us. They only use it to better their business, and they can tweak their products accordingly. So they can't be retrieved by us in any way, and they won't even disclose it that they have such data. Fine. Okay, Arpishan. All right. So nice job so far, guys. But let's learn now about data pipelines. So far, we have learned about data collection and storage, but how can we scale all this? This is where data pipelines come in. Data engineers, one second, the screen is not moving. Yep. The data engineers work to collect and store data so that the others, like analysts and data scientists, can access data for their work, whether it's for visualization or building machine learning models. But how do we scale this? Consider the different data sources you learned about. What if we are collecting data from more than one data source? And then what if these data sources have different types of data? For example, consider real-time streaming data, which is data that is continuously being generated, like tweets from all around the world. This makes storing this incoming data very complicated, because as a data engineer, you want to make sure that data is organized and easy to access. Now enters our hero, the data pipeline. A data pipeline moves data into defined stages. For example, from data ingestion through an API to loading data into a database. A key feature is that pipelines automate this movement. Data is constantly coming in, and it would be tedious to ask a data engineer to manually run programs to collect and store data. Instead, a data engineer schedules tasks, whether it's hourly, daily, or tasks that can be triggered by any event. Because of this automation, data pipelines need to be monitored. Luckily, alerts can be generated automatically. For example, when 95% of storage capacity has been reached, or if an API is responding with an error. Data pipelines aren't necessary for all data science projects, but they are when working with lot of data from different sources. There isn't a set way to make a pipeline. Pipelines are highly customized depending on your data, storage options, and ultimate usage of the data. ETL, which stands for extract, transform, and load, is a popular framework for data pipelines. Let's explore it with a case study. After learning about IoT devices and APIs, you decide to try out both. Specifically, you want to use APIs and devices in your house to better understand the status of your house and neighborhood. So you gather a list of data sources and associated information. The first two are provided by the APIs. Every 30 minutes, you get the weather conditions and you get tweets geotagged in your neighborhood whenever they are published. The remaining rows are the internet at the specified frequencies. How does it all come together? That might be the question in your mind. First, we begin with extracting, whether it's an API or setting up an IoT device. However, a quick look at the frequencies and structures makes us realize that storing the raw data as is won't work. This is where the transform phase comes in. In this stage, we transform our data to make sure the data stays organized so that others can easily find relevant data and use it. A common transformation is joining data from different sources into one dataset. Another is converting the incoming data structure to fit a database's schema. A database's schema informs us how data must be structured before loading it in. A transformation can also be removing irrelevant data. For example, the Twitter API not only gives you a tweet, but other details like the number of followers the person has, which is not useful in a scenario. So we shouldn't store it. Data gets altered throughout the data science workflow. It's important to note that analytical tasks like data preparation and exploration don't occur at this stage. We'll see this in our next chapter. Finally, we then load the data into storage so that it can be used for visualization and analysis. Once we have set up all those steps, we automate. For example, we can say every time we get a tweet, we transform it in a certain way and store it in a specific table in a database. There are tools that are specialized to do this. The most popular is called Airflow. Now it's time for our next chapter. Any doubts, guys, up till now? Anything you want to ask? RK Sharma, Anil Kumar. Any doubts? Any other students that want to ask something? Should we move ahead? No doubt. Good, Anil Kumar. Fine, we'll move ahead then. So in this chapter, guys, I will tell you about data preparation. Data preparation happens after collecting and storing the data. Data rarely comes in ready for analysis. Real life data is very messy and dirty. It needs to be cleaned. Skipping this step may lead to errors down the way, incorrect results, or throw off your algorithms. You would not use vegetables without cleaning, peeling, and dicing them, as your soup would taste weird and no one would eat it. Well, if you don't clean, peel, and dice your data, your results will look weird and no one will use them. Let's take a simple but dirty data set and clean it together. Maybe you can already notice a few things. One fundamental aspect of cleaning data is tidiness. Tidy data is a way of presenting a matrix of data with observations on rows and variables as columns. This is not the case here. Our observations or people are in columns and their features are on rows. Let's take care of that. It's easy to do that programmatically with Python or R. They also help with other cases that you are about to see. The data looks much clearer this way. In general, you want to remove duplicates. Python and R make them easy to identify. Here, we can see that list appears twice. Let's remove the duplicate. What if there's another person called Liz? Then you want a way to uniquely identify each observation. It can be a combination of features, that is name plus last name plus year of birth, for example. But the safest way is to assign a unique ID. Sarah's ID is now 0, Liz's ID is 1, and Hadrian's is 2. Something fishy is going on in the size column, as you can see. Liz simply can't be that tall, or Hadrian and Sarah that small, depending on where you are from. Liz is in the US. She inputted her size in feet. Sarah and Hadrian are based in Europe. They use the metric system. All variables should use the same standard. Programmatically, you can filter values about 2.5 meters and apply a division by 3.281 to get the metric value. Similarly, countries should follow the same format. The United States and France are abbreviated, but Belgium is written in full. Let's fix that. So it's looking better already. Another common issue relates to data types. The tools you use might be able to infer data types for each column, but you should better make sure that they are correct. Here, the age column is encoded as text. If you try to get the mean, you will get an error because the average of two words doesn't make sense to the computer. You should change the type of this feature to numbers or numerics. Ages are now numbers. You can see the quotes have disappeared. Last but not the least, missing values. They are common and occur for various reasons. Suppose the agent doing the entry was distracted, or the person that was surveyed did not understand the question, or it's on purpose that he gave a wrong answer. For example, an event that has not happened yet. There are several ways to deal with missing values. You can substitute the exact value if you have access to the source. For example, you can take an aggregate value like the mean, median, or max, depending on the situation. You can drop the observation altogether, but each observation you remove means less training data for your model. Or you can keep it as is and ignore it. Mean 27.5 and round it up to get 28, which happens to be the correct value. Let's move on to a different chapter, which is about EDA. Any doubts, guys, up till now? I will just open my chat 1 second. Does data structures have anything related with data science? Correct. So data structures are related with the Python programming language that you will use. So you will write complex Python code, and to simplify it, you will have to use data structures. Preparation is done by analyst or programmer or engineer. So the preparation as in the entry. So usually there is a company right beside my building. So they hire 12, 12 graduate students to fit in the data, and then their data scientists use that data. So preparing a data or preparing a table is not done mostly by experts. It is mostly done by people who can do it in minimal salary. Hope I have answered your question, RK Sharma and Anil. Any other doubts, guys, or should we move ahead? Fine. We'll move ahead then. So now let's keep going with exploratory data analysis or EDA. So EDA for short is a process that was promoted by John Tukey, who is a respected statistician in the field. It consists in exploring the data and formulating hypotheses about it and assessing its main characteristics with a strong emphasis on visualization. EDA happens after data preparation, but they can get mixed. EDA can reveal new things that need cleaning. Let's dive right in. What can you say about these four different data sets? Well, from these lines of data, probably very little, right? All four data sets have identical mean and variance, both for the X and Y features. They also have an identical correlation coefficient and the same linear regression equation. The straight line that tries to a simple linear equation is simply a straight line that tries to go through all the points. If you are not sure about some of the metrics listed, that's fairly okay. The point that I was making is they seem awfully similar. But is that the case really? The answer is no. Here are the four graphs. They all tell a different story that pure metrics can't fully convey. The first graph displays a linear relationship, while the second one has a non-linear relationship. In the third graph, we see the linear line is thrown off by one point that has an extreme y value. A similar thing happens with the fourth dataset. We should have no correlation, but one extreme point is enough to display a strong one. In short, streaming through the data gives you little information. Descriptive statistics do a better job at that, but they can often be misleading. Visualization is the thing that teaches us the most. That's why EDA relies heavily on this last technique called visualization. This was an extreme example to make a point, however. To understand it in simpler words, let's look now at another data set. Let's look at SpaceX launches. I mean, let's look at the data behind SpaceX launches. The first thing to do is to know what features we are looking at. We have different information, such as the flight number or what the rocket transported, all have the correct data type. Looking at your tables helps make sense of your observations. Can you notice the missing payload mass for the first two rows? It's always a good idea to calculate descriptive statistics. The SpaceX dataset is mainly qualitative, but we still get a lot of information. We have a count of 55 pretty much everywhere because we have 55 launches. The payload mass column shows 53 because of the two missing values we saw before. Only one mission failed. Most of the time, There is no attempt at landing. You could also calculate the average payload mass or the count of launches per year. But do you know what would be the best for this last option? It is visualization. In a glance, we can see that there were no launches in 2011. The count of launches then gradually increased before doubling in 2017. 2018 it is lower, but remember we only have 3 months of data for this year, so it actually looks like it's going to double again. Now, this launch count is informative, but you probably have a couple more. How about count by launch site? Rockets originally launched from Air Force Station, uh, but in 2017, most rockets were launched from Kennedy Space Center station. How about mission outcome? Just one failure in 2015. Another thing you do during ADA is look for outliers, that is, unusual values. Whether they are errors or valid, it's nice to know about them still, as they can throw your results off. Here, we can see we have only 5 launches with a weight greater than 7,000 kg, when the average mass is closer to 3,800 kg. All right. So before moving ahead, guys, any doubts up till now? You can ask it in the chat. Should we move ahead, guys? Anil Kumar, RK Sharma, the other participants as well, Balakrishna, Abhishek. Are you guys understanding everything? We have Meghna, we have Bharat. Fine, we'll move ahead then. All right. So we finished the last lesson looking at some graphs. So let's talk a little more about visualization. It's often said that one picture is worth 1,000 words. Based on what we saw in the previous lesson, we would tend to agree to that. However, there are a few things to pay attention to. Uh, we should ensure that your chart is easily understandable and straight to the point. For example, you should use color purposefully. Remember this graph that I showed you previously? Counts of launches per year, and it is very straightforward as you can see. But what about this one? This is so colorful and so much better. But aesthetically speaking, it's also confusing. What do the colors correspond to? They correspond to nothing. We are just counting launches per year. Uh, so in that case, one color is enough. You should also be mindful of color blindness. You might distinguish red and green very well, but some people don't. And the number of color blinded people is more than you think. Uh, you can find a lot of information on color blindness online if you want to, as well as palettes of colors that are accessible to those colorblind people. You should also use readable fonts. Uh, Sans serif ones are easier to read. There are nicer fonts available for sure, but your readers should focus on your message and not on your font. That is the thing that you should remember. An image is definitely worth 1,000 words, but words do help. Your graphs should always have a title, so we know what we are looking at. The x and y axis should have labels. Otherwise, they could be anything. And you should also provide a legend if you use colors and patterns so that we know what they refer to. There are some cases when you can start your axis higher than zero if you want to zoom in on evaluation, for example, but this can be a little misleading. Here, it looks like Obamacare enrollment is far from the goal when it's actually close. Follow these advices and you should prevent your readers the confusion that comes with badly designed graphs like this one or this one. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then what is worth 1,000 pictures, right? The answer is dashboard. Well, technically, a dashboard of a few pictures is enough already. The point that I'm trying to make is showing several pictures together can be more insightful than looking at them separately or trying to pack all of the insights in one graph. Your car dashboards indicates the car speed, the motor rotation speed, and the proportion of gas left. Individually, these pieces of information are useful, but together they paint a much bigger picture and make your trip more safe and more comfortable. That's what dashboards do. Group all the relevant information in one place to make it easier to gather insights and act on them. On this dashboard, any sales person can see not only how sales are progressing this quarter, but also how this progression compares to previous quarters. On top of that, they can keep track of transactions and opportunities as well as of customer count. They can filter all of this data by software, service, or maintenance sales. All of that in one place and customize for their needs. That is what we want. Business intelligence tools let you clean, explore, visualize data, and build dashboards without requiring any programming knowledge basically. Such tools are Tableau, Looker, or Power BI. Of course, you can also do that programmatically using Python, R, or even JavaScript. The next level is to make your visualization interactive, which BI tools or business interactive tools make really easy. It lets you display more targeted information when hovering over an element, like you can see here. We also talked about filters. Here, the user can filter on the types of sales and the quarter. Giving power to the user is a great way to engage them. I think we are done for this session. Any doubts, guys, up till now? Anything that you want to ask? So if you are interested, guys, in becoming a data scientist, you can go through a Versio course for the same. We provide a very curated course if you want to enroll in. There are 3 categories and you can choose as per your requirement. You can look at their features. Any doubts, guys? You can paste them on in the chat. Anything related to data science, any concept, or anything related to our course. We are done for this session, guys. If there's no doubt, then I think we can close this session. If there is any doubt, we still have, we will still wait 30 seconds to 1 minute and you can ask them. Not only related to a course, can we have your contact details? Uh, you can contact me on LinkedIn, RK Sharma. The thing is, if I give you my Gmail ID, there's a lot of mails that I get and it will be difficult to respond. Just type in Smith Shah 97 and just type in Smith Shah Versio and you should have my ID in the search page. So we have also posted the link, guys. If you want to access this page, you can see the link in the chat. You can go through them. If there are any doubts, you can contact me on LinkedIn or you can contact the Versio team itself. They may be able to better help you. Fine. If no doubts, guys, then we can close this session. So you can forward your queries, guys, to marketing@versio.in. That is the email. If you have any doubt, fine. We will close the session, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining in.